Growing up, one of the more important franchises to me was Star Wars. I remember walking into my dad's office and seeing the classic VHS trilogy collection of Star Wars and asking what it was. And I was so young that Darth Vader scared me, and his face was on the cover of A New Hope, so I had to watch Empire first. Now look, I was so young that I didn't even understand it, so I think I did get the correct Star Wars experience later on, but I got into this franchise as a very young boy. And I think a lot of people, they have similar experiences regardless of the age, where it was a very magical thing to them, and it was a universe where someone could be anything, do whatever, and the Force was this very powerful, interesting story element. Now, in that same way, people, regardless of the trilogy they grew up with, they usually had some character that they appreciated a lot. And one of them I always thought was just a core heart and soul of what Star Wars was Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker has famously been portrayed by Mark Hamill, and this character has also been portrayed by a wide number of other people through video games and appeared in comics and all kinds of stuff. But most of those stories were told in an old continuity that is now separate from the continuity that Star Wars is focusing on. That was told in the Legends continuity, or the expanded universe from before Disney acquired the rights to Star Wars. So today I want to ask a question. Should Star Wars now be done with Luke Skywalker? And I want your thoughts on that, because Mark Hamill seems to imply that he thinks it should be. Now, Mark Hamill has closed the door on several characters that he has played in the past. One of them that I really connected with was the DC animated universe classic Joker from things like Batman the Animated Series, Beyond, Justice League, Static Shock, all kinds of stuff, right? This was a character who did appear in a lot, and Mark Hamill brought that character to life in a similar way that he brought Luke Skywalker to life. Now, that said, when the sequel trilogy came out, Mark Hamill was very obviously not happy with some of the ways that his classic Star Wars character was handled. This is where the conversation can get a bit contentious, and I want to say that if you love the sequel trilogy, that's fine. I respect you for it, you can have that opinion. For me, I thought it started off strong, and then by the midpoint really didn't know what to do with the original trilogy characters. And unfortunately, that's just kind of how I feel about it. I could give you a whole video essay on why I feel that way, but it is also a feeling that it seemed like was shared by Mark Hamill, who multiple times during The Last Jedi voiced his discomfort and displeasure with the way the character was being portrayed and many of the writing choices. The reason I bring that up is because that movie essentially leaves Luke in a position where there's not much left for him. Now, that said, Mark himself did say, I had my time, I'm appreciative of that, but I really think they should focus on the future and all the new characters. And while I do respect his opinion on this, I think that it's kind of frustrating to see in a way, because there are decades of stories that can be told between places like Star Wars Return of the Jedi and also Star Wars The Force Awakens. Now, I think some people secretly hoped that they would decanonize the sequels, and after how 8 was handled and 9 felt like a band-aid, I personally kind of felt that way. I don't think Disney is going to do it, though. They're not really doing a ton with that era, but they're also very stubborn. They're a very prideful studio. Disney and then the Lucasfilm people under them are very much stick-to-your-guns type people, whether they're right or wrong. While not every single story in the old expanded universe, or Star Wars Legends as it's now called, was, good, there were certainly some that were awful and a lot that were mid. There were also a lot of very good stories in that universe, from video games to comics to more. And I think something Disney's era has done well is tell comic book stories about Luke Skywalker, especially set in eras like between Star Wars Episode 4 and 5. Or 5 and 6, in those kinds of eras. I think for me, when I'm looking at Star Wars and I'm looking at all that they did in the past with Luke Skywalker in that previous continuity before Disney, and then I'm looking at the amount Disney has done, it doesn't really feel to me like there's nothing else you can do with Luke Skywalker. It doesn't really feel to me like this character needs to be dead and buried. Now, does he need to be the focus of the entire franchise going forward? No. And in fact, a lot of people are so burned out by Star Wars, they don't even want a franchise going forward. So you've already got all these varying camps of opinions when it comes to where to take Star Wars. Many say just leave it. Never gonna happen. I'm sorry, it's a Disney property. Many say, okay, let's go in a totally new direction. Many want to go back to the past of what it was. I think in general, though, there is a way to preserve those old stories, have that be its own separate canon, that Legends canon that people can still love and enjoy. You reprint those games, you reprint those comics and novels, etc. But also, I do think you can still tell new stories with Luke Skywalker, especially in that gap era. Now, there have been a few, and I'm not going to pretend that I have been able to read every single Star Wars novel. In fact, ever since the continuity switched and I was heavily into Legends, it's been hard to bring myself to get overly invested in reading Star Wars novels, because part of me wonders if they'll just be decanonized again in the future. I don't know. But I have gotten into the comics and I have enjoyed what they've done with characters like Luke and like Vader. And I've also enjoyed most of things like The Mandalorian, where you can also tackle characters like that from a sideline point of view, where they're not the focus. I just kind of wonder why you can't do more stories like that, with or without Mark Hamill. If Mark Hamill wants to be done, I think he was kind of misled with the sequels, regardless of what you think about them. From his comments and the comments of other actors, it seems like they were kind of sold on a reunion tour type thing where the original trilogy cast was going to be back together. Doesn't really happen much. So I can understand why with that plus the writing direction, he was disenfranchised with it and kind of wants to move on with his life nowadays. He's not outwardly angry, but he's just moving on. And I can also see why Star Wars would want to move on to new characters. Some of the best characters I think Star Wars Legends tackled were new characters outside of the original trilogy. There were very, very classic characters like Revan and the Knights of the Old Republic crew, characters as well like the Clone Commandos, actually for Star Wars Republic Commando. I would love to see stories told with characters like that now. In fact, nowadays, I still don't understand why some of those things had to be left only in Legends. When they brought over the new continuity and they did things like make Clone Wars canon in the movies and that's it, I always wondered why they couldn't pick and choose certain things like Republic Commando or Knights of the Old Republic. Those are very, very strong stories and strong characters that I think Star Wars can support. But at its heart, Star Wars is also, and always has been, a story of someone who rises above impossible odds in order to bring hope to people. It's very much like a Superman type story, where you have these horrible conditions and this universe that needs hope, but it doesn't have it, and then in comes Luke Skywalker, the unsuspecting farm boy, almost a David and Goliath type story, who beats evil not with a sword, not with a lightsaber, not really, but with compassion, by showing mercy, by seeing the good in someone that's done horrible things, and without that person's help, he couldn't have succeeded. That was Luke Skywalker, and in many ways that was also Star Wars. I think to leave that character in the past, unless you have exhausted that character, I don't mean milked them and told bad stories, but I mean unless you have fully explored that character, I think it would be a real mistake. I think it's a mistake right now that there aren't things like a Star Wars The Clone Wars style animated series following Luke and his adventures after Episode 6. I think it's a mistake that the video game side of Star Wars refuses to make use of a character like that other than one mission in Star Wars Battlefront 2 from EA. I think it's a mistake to push only forward, the same way it would be a mistake to only live in the past. Star Wars has always been interesting because it does have something for everyone. It has an era for everyone. Many grew up with the prequels, and I was originally exposed to the original trilogy, but I would say I watched the prequels the most. And if you're a prequels fan, there is a lot of content out there for you, from novels to games and more in that old continuity, and even now in the new one, the Clone Wars show. And yet when it comes to the original trilogy and Luke, especially in this new Disney era of canon, I don't really feel like this character has been fully explored, and yet this character personifies hope and personifies what's so special and interesting about Star Wars. If Mark Hamill doesn't want to voice or have his face photoshopped onto or appear in magazines as or whatever the character of Luke Skywalker, there are many other actors out there who could do so. You know, the actor who plays him, his name is escaping me right now, in The Mandalorian, without deep faking Luke's face onto him, Mark Hamill's face onto him as Luke, looks just like him. You know, a character or an actor like Sebastian Stan, he looks a lot like Mark Hamill. There are actors out there who could play this role. There are people out there who could write stories about this character into games. But it almost feels like the regime at Lucasfilm and that group doesn't necessarily want to touch this character that much outside of some comics. And I don't exactly understand why. You know, you do have people like Dave Filoni who do want to incorporate this character in different ways, who did grow up with Star Wars. And you have people like Sam Witwer who still work with this brand, who I would say are experts at storytelling and at these characters and why they matter. But in the same way, you have a lot of people who I also believe are, I don't know, almost resistant to some of what part of the fandom wants. Now, does that mean that everything should be by committee? No. But I do think that there is a big thirst and a hunger out there for stories regarding this character who's special to people. And I think that there's a lot more that you can do with him. Now, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I am interested to hear that. I did really try to be respectful to multiple groups of people on this. I have very passionate opinions about parts of Star Wars that I try to tone down in videos like this just because I feel like it derails the conversation. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on where you'd want to see this series go, and if you'd want to see any, storylines from classic Star Wars adapted. I would love to see some stuff with Mara Jade, Luke Skywalker's wedding, things like that. I mean, there were very interesting parts of Luke from the past where he was trying to dismantle the failures of the previous Jedi Order and rebuild the Jedi into something greater than it was. And again, that's, that hope personified. And that's why I care so much about this character. A character who defeated evil with love and not with violence. It's just fascinating to me. And I think it's a character who will honestly always resonate with different people in different ways. If you want to support this channel, you can use Fortnite code DJAY123. That helps us out quite a bit. And also, we do have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop, where we make coasters, keychains, trays, and more out of recycled paper from comics, manga, magazines, and other things that have been damaged. That paper is damaged. Oh no, it's damaged. What do you do with it? Do you just throw it in the trash? Do you throw it in the ocean, in a landfill? Well, you do if you're a jerk. But what we try to do instead of that is we actually take some of that, we reuse that paper, we give it new life through these resin pieces, and then we make sure the rest actually goes into the recycling instead of just into the trash. And my wife Jill also makes amazing handmade resin jewelry over here and beaded jewelry, all kinds of great stuff. Some of you have been supporting this lately. We appreciate you. Discount code DJAY123 will get you 10% off here. Same as our Fortnite code, although unfortunately I don't have the pull to get you 10% off on Fortnite, but I do right here. So we hope you'll check that out. Have a fantastic day. Links are in the description as always, including to our other channels. We're actually going to be playing through some Star Wars games soon over on Degenerate Plays, our Let's Play channel down there, where we play through games podcast style. And I want to say a huge thank you to our members right here. I recently put up another members video, so if you are on the members tier lists at any point, you should go check that out. There are special playlists for you. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.